Hello, it's Sophie here again from North Bridlington Library. I work for the East Riding and we're really sorry that we still can't be with you at the moment. So we're continuing with our videos to help us go down memory lane. So far, hopefully you will have seen our other videos. Alex might have done some or I might have done some. Alex is who I work with. And we've done some rooms around the house and we've talked about our houses and streets and things like that. So today, can you guess what it is that we'll be talking about today? Can you see? So we've talked about the rooms of our house and we've talked about the house itself. So today, that's right, we're going to talk about our gardens. So, did you have a garden? Maybe you had a front garden or a back garden or both. Or maybe you had a yard. If you had a yard, did you grow things in your yard? Maybe you had pots in there or raised beds. Same for your garden, you might have still had pots or raised beds. Maybe you lived in a type of house where you didn't have either. Maybe you had an open space somewhere that you went to play, or possibly went round to family's house that had a garden or a yard that you could play in. So what outside space did you have? What were your neighbours' gardens like? Were your neighbours quite competitive? So did you all try and keep the nicest gardens or the nicest front yard or even just the nicest, cleanest doorstep? So what we're going to do, like we normally do throughout these videos, is have little pauses so you can discuss the things that I've just spoken about and try and remember how your garden was either growing up. I tend to talk about our childhood memories, so your garden as a child, or maybe your garden when you'd been married and the house that you moved into, maybe the garden that you remember your children playing in. I do tend to talk about childhood memories. So do you want to have a little think about what you had growing up? So did you have a garden or a yard or some kind of outside space? So we're going to have our first little pause now, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about the gardens and yards in more detail. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you've had your little discussion about did you have a garden or a yard. So now what we're going to do is talk about what you might have had in your garden. Now I'll probably keep referring to gardens or yards, but probably mainly gardens. I hope most of us remember playing in a garden growing up. So what was in your garden or yard? Later I'm going to have a look at things to do with your vegetables and flowers, but think about the things that were actually in your garden. So one of the things that we used to have, and I remember using one at my aunt's house. I hated it because it was so cold. Could have been an outside toilet. It's quite a dark photo, I'm afraid. But do you remember having an outside toilet? Do you remember how cold it was, and was there spiders in there? Got another couple of images here. They're a bit better. And this picture at the top here looks like it may also have been used as a bit of a shed, a bit of a short storage shed, which a lot of them might have been. There we go, so that's your outside toilet. And you had the cistern at the top and you pulled the chain down, not like the ones that we have today. If you can hear a funny noise in the background, it's because it's very heavily raining here right now. But hopefully by the time you're watching this video, you'll have lovely sun. So I apologise for the strange noise in the background. So yes, you might also have had a shed in your garden as well to keep the tools in or anything like that. Possibly you had a compost bin, because we tried to be quite self-reliant, so food scraps in the kitchen might have gone in your compost bin. Talking about being self-reliant, maybe you had a greenhouse or a grow house, depending on if you had a garden or a yard. There is a lean-to greenhouse in this picture here. I believe they were quite popular in the Victorian times, and here I think it might have been an aluminium frame. It's a 1950s greenhouse, and that really helped us to be quite self-sufficient, especially after the war when it wasn't as easy to get hold of your fruit and vegetables and things. They were quite often grown at home. Something else that you may have had, this was another job that I didn't really like either, was you may have had a coal bunker or a coal shed. I had a coal bunker and it had a really tiny door to get into it. And again, it was always cold and full of spiders. I used to try and get that job done as quickly as possible. So there's a type of coal bunker here. I don't know if you can see that one. And a coal shed there. Do you remember the smell of the coal? Or how anything in your garden smelled? Maybe as well, the garden or the yard is somewhere where the washing was done. So it could have been done by yourselves, or maybe your mum did it. You'll have had a wash day. So some of the items that you may have had in your garden could have been for washing. It wasn't always from the kitchen, especially if it was a nice day outside. Maybe there was a little bit of extra room outside to do your washing. So these are some items that you may have used. So what you can do as well is I may sometimes get the name of these wrong. So please get in touch with us if I do. We are at East Riding Libraries, Museums and Archives. So if I've said something is called something and it's not quite right, you can always let us know. I believe this was, you've got your dolly here and your posser and your washboard, and is that the dolly tub? So you may have used those in the garden or yard to do your washing. And then when you've done the washing, you would have needed to have helped dry it. So maybe you had a mangle in your garden. Quite often Alex that works here, I think her grandma had a mangle. She was allowed to turn the handle but not feed the clothes to because they were a bit concerned about her fingers. And I remember my auntie having a mangle in her garden. And then when it was put through the mangle, you would have needed to dry it. So maybe you had a washing line as well in your garden, and you may have hung the washing up, not like today with the plastic pegs that we have, with the wooden pegs. And again, I might be wrong, but I used to call these dolly pegs because these were great for crafts as well. We used to make them into angels for the top of Christmas trees and little characters. And the other thing that you may have had as well to do your washing, because you would have needed to have heated the water up, could have been a copper in your garden. So it was normally a fire in the bottom, it could have been a coal fire or a wood fire, and the water was put in the top, and that's how the water was heated to do your washing. Now, in the fairly early days, a lot of people still had Anderson shelters in their gardens from the war. Did you have an Anderson shelter in your garden? Was it used for anything, or was it just still left there? So that's a gentleman there. I believe he's building his there. And there's just one in the background here. Other things that you may have had, if you were very lucky in your garden, now you may have had games in there. Or maybe if you had children, your children were growing up, you may have had a slide or swings. I had a swing in my garden. Sometimes it could have been hung just from a tree, or you may have had the tyre hung from a tree. Or if you had the trees, maybe you had a tree house. And what other games would you have played as well in your garden or your yard? That's something that you can have a quick discussion about. Also, did you have any animals? Now, were animals, if you had them, were they pets or were they practical? So maybe you had a dog that was for security, to bark when people came near the house, or maybe it was a pet dog. Maybe you had rabbits or chickens. So maybe you had a chicken coop in your garden. So you could have used these for eggs. So I've mentioned a few of the things that you could find in a garden or a yard. So again, we're going to pause this video in just a minute. And so if you want to talk about what you had in yours, did you have the old toilets in your garden or a shed? Did you do your washing in there? Did you have any animals in your garden? So we'll pause this video again, and if you want to have a quick discussion, we'll come back in a minute. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you've had your discussion about what was in your garden or yard. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the growing side of things. And so first of all, we're going to talk about vegetables or fruit. So what did you grow? In regards to vegetables, how was it grown? Did you have a garden? Did you have an allotment or a yard? So depending on what you had, maybe depended on how those things were grown. So did you have pots in your garden or beds? You might have had raised beds or like your vegetable patches in the garden, or maybe you had an allotment that you went to and tended, and that would have had your vegetable patches in there. So let's have a little look at just a couple of things that you might have grown. So who can recognise this? We have a cauliflower. So not everybody likes cauliflower. I love cauliflower. So can you remember the texture of a cauliflower? And also maybe the kind of cabbagey smell that the cauliflower had. And do you remember how that cauliflower tasted? You also maybe had a greenhouse. Maybe you grew your vegetables in a greenhouse. Maybe again you had pots or grow bags in your greenhouse. This could have been something that you grew in a greenhouse. So here we have a cucumber. So again, do you remember cucumbers can be a little bit spiky when you grow them yourself, and you've got to get the spikes off. And then you cut into them and they're very juicy. Really nice in salads. And how about tomato? The vines of tomatoes always have a really particular smell, I think, especially when you walk into a greenhouse and there's tomato plants in there. I think they have a really specific smell. So you've got tomatoes there, but there's loads of different types of tomatoes you might have grown as well. If you had fruit trees in your garden or allotment, maybe you grew different fruit. So we have an apple here, but maybe you could have grown plums or pears or all sorts. We used to grow plums. We had some plum trees, and we had to make sure we got to the plums just as they were getting ripe before the wasps did, otherwise they'd all get eaten. Maybe if you didn't have anywhere that apples were grown, did you used to go, I think it was called apple scrumping? Did you ever do that? Maybe you had a compost bin, which helped with your vegetable growing. Did you go outside and gather horse poo? That was really good for your garden and for your vegetables, especially maybe if the scrap man had been by. So you go and clear it off the road, or quite often you can go and just get bags of horse poo, which is really, really good for your garden. So how were these fruits grown? Maybe they were on trees or bushes. So you could have had gooseberries, which my granddad used to grow, or peas, which did you have the plants that grew up? And you had to get the canes out for them to grow up. Do you remember shelling peas? Do you remember the process of picking the vegetables or the fruits and what you did with them then? So maybe you would shell the peas, which was quite often a common job in many families. What did you do with the extra fruit or vegetables that you'd grown? Maybe there was competitions, like the Women's Institute, the WI, maybe there was competitions. Did you sell any fruit or vegetables that you'd grown? Maybe you made them into jams or pickles. So can you remember the process of making those and how maybe the kitchen smelled whilst you were making those jams or pickles? What food do you remember? What was your favourite food that involved things from the garden or the allotment? Maybe you would make crumbles, so apple crumbles or rhubarb crumbles. Did you ever go and pick rhubarb and eat it raw? I used to go and pick it, just the red part, and we'd dip it in sugar and just eat rhubarb raw. But I really liked my mum's apple crumble. She was really good at making them. How did you keep things away from the fruit and vegetables to stop the pests getting to them? So how about, did you have a scarecrow? Some people had the beer traps to catch the slugs in. You would maybe get the caterpillars, like the cabbage white caterpillars that would get to your cabbages. And I've heard about carrot flies as well. Alex said that her dad always had a real problem with carrot flies. But maybe you had slugs as well, or aphids. So how did you go about keeping the pests away from your fruit and vegetables? So again, we're going to have another little pause now. So if you want to talk about the vegetables or maybe the fruits that you grew, and how did you grow them, and what did you do with those fruits and vegetables? Okay, so we'll have a quick pause now. Thank you. Okay, so we're back again. Hopefully you've had your discussion now about the vegetables and the fruits. So next we're going to have a look at flowers and the different flowers that you may have grown in your garden or your yard. Were these flowers seasonal? So did you really look forward to seeing things that meant that the seasons were changing? So maybe you got excited about seeing the first snowdrops that grew, or maybe the first crocuses. Poinsettias, they're quite seasonal. So poinsettias to me, or I think the Christmas rose it may also be called, reminds me of Christmas. So are there certain flowers that remind you of certain seasons? How about the daffodils, which are quite associated with Easter? So does daffodils again remind you of spring? How about the sunflowers? They're quite a summery flower, I believe. Some people had the competitions of growing the sunflowers and you could see them kind of peeking over walls as you went by. I really like sunflower seeds as well. I like collecting the sunflower seeds. So how did you grow these flowers? The same as with your vegetables. Were these grown in pots or raised beds or just in the garden generally? Maybe you had a lawn and you had the flower bed around there. Did you have a trellis? Did you have plants growing up the trellis? Are there certain scents that remind you, that really take you back to being in your garden? Maybe the smell of roses or lavender or jasmine when the air is warm. Do you have a favourite scent or that certain smell of a flower that is your favourite or really takes you back to being in the garden? Same with colours as well. Were there certain colours that you preferred to see in your garden? How about your wedding bouquet? What flowers did you have in your wedding bouquet? Were these grown by yourself? Did these come from a florist, or maybe they were grown in somebody's garden that made a bouquet for you? Maybe also you had indoor flowers. So you could have grown flowers indoors. Lots of people grew cactus indoors, which I have some, and they're many years old. In fact, they were passed down from grandparents and things. So I'll just show you a few flowers now, and then we'll let you have a discussion about the flowers that you grew. There is as well just a couple of examples here of the gardens. So you have allotments here. There's a beautiful garden here with the different flowers in, and you can see there the different colours of the flowers. So a couple of the flowers that I mentioned. We have the daffodil. So does it remind you of Easter or spring? You've got a nice sunny sunflower. They quite often attracted the bees. We have some daisies here. Now, whoops, hopefully you can see these. It's gone a little bit shiny. But we have some daisies there. Talking about cactus, although I don't think, or hopefully, you wouldn't have grown one that big in the house. How about lilies? Now they had a beautiful smell, but quite often you had to cut off the stamens because if the pollen got on anything it would stain clothes, and the smell was quite strong. And here's another quite seasonal flower, is the tulip. So do you want to have a quick discussion about the flowers that you grew? What your favourite flowers were, or the favourite scents? Or maybe about your wedding bouquet and the flowers that you may have had in there. So we're just going to pause it again and let you have another discussion. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully now you've had your discussion about the flowers in your garden. So we're going to have a quick look about how to grow those. So normally you would have started off with seeds. So we have here a little tin where the seeds are kept, and there's a few seeds in here. Let's have a look. We have some sunflower seeds. Don't know how well you can see those. Here we go, sunflower seeds. We showed the photo of the sunflower earlier. I love sunflower seeds. We've got some pumpkin seeds there. So in your vegetable patch you may have grown pumpkins because they were quite seasonal, getting ready for Halloween. And I love when it's Halloween using the insides of the pumpkins and making pumpkin soup. And there we go. So here are the seeds that we may have planted. So there's hundreds of different types. Now, you may have planted them straight into a flower pot. This is a terracotta one, and here's the trowel. So can you remember the noise of making your digging in the soil and planting your seeds? And here's some other ones. But I mean, we had all sorts of tools for our garden. There we go. You may have had a lawnmower as well. I mean, you could have had the push-along ones before the electric ones or the petrol lawnmowers came out. So did you have one of the push-along lawnmowers? Did you try and get your grass to go stripy? Other things that may have been used as well for the garden. Great big garden fork there. So do you remember digging in the garden and loosening the soil? And quite often birds would come around as well because they'd be looking for the worms that you just dug up. What else do we have? We have some garden shears here. These are quite stiff. These need oiling and probably sharpening. But these are mine from home. And some little pruning shears as well, or pinking shears as they may have been called, just for pruning your plants. So who did what in your garden? One of my jobs was deadheading. So especially when we'd had the daffodils, we had to go around and deadhead the daffodils. So maybe you had watering, who watered the flowers of the garden, or the picking and the pruning. So who had which job? So do you want to have a quick discussion about how you grew your seeds? The other thing as well that you may have had would be in a greenhouse. We were going to use this as our mystery object, but we know that this is a heater for a greenhouse. So did you have one of these to help your vegetables or your plants grow? So do you want to have a quick discussion about your seeds and how you grew your plants and maybe the tools that you used? Thank you. Okay, so hopefully you've had your discussion about how to grow the seeds in your garden. So really, that we're about there with our gardens now. There's just one little extra section I'd like to talk about, and that could be the wildlife that you may have had in your garden. So did you try and attract wildlife to your garden? Maybe you wanted birds. So I have some bird seed here. You see the bird seed. And here we have bird table. And got a couple of bird feeders here. Did you ever have any of those? I think, is that a willow tit on there? The thing I like about bird feeders and bird tables is the noise that you can hear of the birds and attracting the birds. Should we just have a little listen to some bird song now? One of my favourites is probably, I like the blackbird, the noise of the blackbird, or there's the chaffinch, or the robin, or quite often the wood pigeon. And there's sometimes as well, when you heard a cuckoo, you knew, I think it was spring was coming. So I find it really relaxing. I love the sound of birds. And just quickly then, some of the other wildlife that may have come to your garden. So how about the smaller wildlife? Maybe you had a buddleia bush. But we have a peacock butterfly here that may have been attracted. Bees as well, which are super helpful to the garden. And the wasps, maybe not as helpful. They're the ones that used to eat my plums. And how about the ladybird? But But they were really good in a garden because they helped eat the aphids. Maybe you had a pond. That's actually something that we haven't mentioned. Maybe you had a pond in your garden. So here we have a tadpole, which would then hopefully grow into frogs. And here's some larger wildlife that if you had a garden, maybe if you were a bit rural, you have badger here. Sometimes if you're really lucky, you get some of this wildlife visiting your garden. So we have a badger. My mum gets lots of hedgehogs and she feeds the hedgehogs, and in the winter we'll build hedgehog houses for them. We have a fox here. And how about the squirrel? Sometimes they were quite difficult to keep away from the bird feeders. Another quite common ones are the woodlice, and you've got snails and slugs. Now they were kind of classed as pests in your garden. And here we have an ant. Now it's a really, really long list which could go on, so I think I'll probably leave that there today. So if you want to have a discussion about the wildlife that you found in your garden, so it could just be the insects, maybe you just had the insects there, and you can have maybe another overall discussion about your garden or your yard with what you grew. So I will leave that here for today. It's been really, really lovely speaking to you, and hopefully we'll come back soon with another video. We don't know what that one will be yet, so that's something to look forward to. And if there's anything you want to get into touch with me about, or the library, if you have any stories that you want to tell us or anything that you want to share that you've discussed, we're on Facebook, and at the moment we are at East Riding Libraries, Museums and Archives, and you can send us a message there. It would be really nice to hear from you. Thank you very much. Goodbye.